Welcome to Two Bees in a Podcast, brought to you by the Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. It is our goal to advance the understanding of honeybees and beekeeping, grow the beekeeping community, and improve the health of honeybees everywhere. In this podcast, you'll hear research updates, beekeeping management practices discussed, and advice on beekeeping from our resident experts, beekeepers, scientists, and other program guests. Join us for today's program, and thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast. Hello and welcome to Two Bees in a Podcast. I'm Jamie Ellis, accompanied by co-host Amy Vu. Amy?
I'm excited for this episode today because we're talking about one of my favorite things.
Flowers?
Extension.
Oh, extension. My bad.
Wait.
I was just guessing. Do you like flowers, by the way?
Yeah, they're okay.
Okay. You know, they wrote a song like, these are my favorite things. Isn't that in The Sound of Music or something like that? These are a few of my favorite things. That's it.
Is that The Sound of Music?
Yep, that's where it was. That's right. I can't even remember. Apple strudel. Anyway, we need to get back to why we're doing this podcast in the first place. That's for you, the beekeeper. Guys, we have a fantastic program today. We are talking about extension, what it is, how it's done, how it's evaluated, and our very own Amy Vu is going to be talking about that.
I don't just do social media.
We are going to also discuss research at the academic level, how research projects are done. We'll bring in Dr. Umberto Boncristiani, who's going to discuss specifically some of the projects that we do here at the University of Florida. In our third segment, we're actually going to be bringing in Dr. Meghan Milbrath, who's an academic specialist at Michigan State University. She has a 50-50 split in research and extension. So you will be able to see how extension and research are integrated in her program to address the needs of beekeepers in her area. So I think you will enjoy today's episode. And now, Amy, we're going to talk about extension.
Yay, my favorite thing in the whole world, extension.
Amy is our extension coordinator. And of course, extension is not limited just to Florida. This exists around the United States and really around the world. So what Amy is going to be sharing with us is relevant really everywhere. Right, Amy?
Absolutely. I have friends who are extension agents all around the country and outside.
So, Amy, what in the world is extension?
So, extension is just that one leg of the land-grant institution. I've talked about it before in the first podcast, and it's essentially just meeting the needs of the community. So we have instruction, for students, for undergraduates, for grad students, and faculty that are teaching those, and then they're going out, and getting jobs. And then, of course, we have the research that's going on. And historically, what was happening was there was research going on, and they were working with farmers, but they, all their time was focused on research. So they didn't really have a lot of time to take the research information to share it with the public. And so that's where extension kind of started to play a role in the land grant system, was just working with farmers, working with researchers, and kind of bridging that gap.
So, Amy, I can tell you when I was hired by the University of Florida, what I believed extension to be at the time is grossly different than what I know extension to be now. So,
what did you think it was?
Well, prior to coming to UF, I'd spent a lot of time answering emails from beekeepers, answering phone calls from beekeepers, and speaking at local bee clubs, and occasionally writing a popular article for, the American Bee Journal, et cetera. And I thought all of those were extension programs, but that's not at all what extension is, though it's part of extension.
It is part of extension, sure.
Right. So the way that I usually teach it is that instruction is teaching university or college students. Extension is teaching individuals who aren't at the university or college at that moment, right? So I always say it's teaching people who aren't paying to be taught.
Exactly. A lot of people, it's funny, people just think, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You're posting on social media, you're doing podcasts, you're doing all this stuff. So what's your job again?
Well, it's funny because, extension's not mindless, right? It's not just us teaching because we're paid to teach, right?
It's teaching with a purpose.
Exactly.
Yep.
That is exactly right. So let's start from the top. You've told us a bit about what extension is. Mm-hmm. We've talked briefly about target audiences, right? They're not sitting in our classroom and paying for credit so they can get degrees. Who are these people who benefit from extension?
Sure, and that's also another fun thing about extension. Target audience can really be anybody you want it to be. Whether they're toddlers, working at a kindergarten, preschool, elementary school, and then, of course, adults. Adult education. That's one of my favorite things about Extension is teaching people who want to learn beyond, whether after they graduated high school, after they graduated college. And I love working with retirees. They're a lot of fun for me to work with
Amy,
as well.
you're better than me, right? See, I teach, a youth group, and when I get mad at them, you just send them to the corner. But when you do adult education and you get upset,
I still do that.
you send them to the corner. It's tough. All right, so you got target audience. So I assume at this point you've got this extension background, you've got your target audience, so you're just going to go lecture to them?
Lecture is probably one of the worst methods of education that I prefer not to teach.
I don't like my lectures.
You gave a lecture yesterday and someone next to me said, he's got really good dad jokes.
Well, I am a dad, so I will take that.
So, just for example, here at the lab, one of our primary target audiences are beekeepers, right? So that's just a general broad way to identify our target audience.
Yeah, but you don't just go speak to them, right? You need to know something.
Sure. So we do lots of things. We like to, I'm just going to go ahead and say the word SMART objectives.
There you go.
We like to set objectives up. And, again, we're teaching for a purpose. So really everything that we're teaching is purposeful. And we have a plan as far as what we would like people to learn from, either a workshop. And that this is, again, we're talking about lecturing, and that's just an activity that goes into identifying how we can move forward with that objective.
So let's think about it systematically, right? We've got a target audience, beekeepers, right? That's who we work with specifically, but other extension specialists might work with other individuals, right? Other target audiences. And we want to teach them, but how do we know what we need to teach them? Right? Just because I'm teaching doesn't mean I'm achieving anything, right? So we have to ask them.
Sure. So we're doing needs assessments. We basically go out, and it's really interesting because when you go to your local extension office, it's going to be completely different depending on where you go. So, and that again is to identify the audience, and they're working with their audience. So, someone who wants to work in a very urban environment or a very rural environment is going to have completely different objectives. And they're going to be able to identify those objectives by just networking with the community and asking them what their needs are. And, as a whole, trying to identify what different workshops or activities they can do to be able to answer some of the needs and at least acknowledge some of the needs of that community.
So to make this, I think, easier for our listeners to digest, what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to use Varroa and beekeepers as an example. Let's say that Amy here has conducted a needs assessment of, we'll limit our population and say commercial beekeepers.
Great.
And she's conducted a needs assessment and discovered from commercial beekeepers in a needs assessment that Varroa are their biggest issue and that they're not confident or comfortable determining their Varroa loads, which would, of course, inform their decision to treat or not to treat. So with that background, Amy, with that needs assessment conducted, you know your target audience, you know what they need. Mm-hmm. You said something about objectives and SMART objectives. So you don't just teach them and say, hey, this is what you need to do for Varroa.
Exactly. So we have something called SMART objectives, and what that stands for, it's an acronym. So the S it means specific. So we want to be specific in our objective. We don't want to say, we would like our beekeepers to learn about Varroa mite.
Yeah, or we're going to keep bees alive. Something like that, right?
That's even, yep.
Yeah, it's got to be very, very specific. So we'll wrap all of this into an example objective in a moment, but specific.
Sure.
All right, specific.
So M is measurable, right? A is achievable. The R in it means that it's relevant. And then the T means that it's time-based. That stands for time-based.
It's always the R that I forget. I remember specific, measurable, attainable, or achievable, and time limited, but I always forget relevant.
So that's funny that you say that, just because, it does need to be relevant, and that's a huge part in extension, right, is to stay up to date on different teaching methods.
Teething methods. Babies in the future.
But it does have to be relevant. So the way that we're disseminating that information, and we, you and I had kind of spoken about the different activities and the way that we distribute that information. So it's not just lecture anymore. We're doing a podcast right now. We are very active on social media. If we could make videos, if we could go out into the field. And so we use these objectives, and we'll go ahead and talk about that next step. So you take those objectives, you identify very, very specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based objectives.
Before we move on, let me see if I can put this together. All right, Varroa, target audiences, beekeepers. I'm going to try to create a SMART objective.
Let's do it.
Let's see if we can do this.
Okay.
Oh, I'm nervous now. All right. We want to reduce colony losses in commercial beekeeper operations to Varroa by 30% in 5 years. Does that tick all the SMART objectives? Is it specific? It seems specific, right?
It's pretty specific, yep.
It's measurable, right? Because we can determine if we've reduced colony losses to Varroa over this amount of time.
Yep.
Okay, it's achievable. Hopefully we didn't set the goal too high. I wouldn't want to say that we're going to eliminate all losses to Varroa.
Sure.
That's not achievable.
You're being realistic.
All right, it's relevant. It's relevant because we know that's what beekeepers said through a needs assessment, right?
Yep.
And it's time limited, right? I threw that 5-year thing on the end.
Sure.
Did I do it?
You did it.
Did I write a SMART objective?
You wrote a SMART
All
objective.
right.
You are a smart person.
I feel like, you need to tell my wife that. All right, I feel accomplished. So we've got the SMART objectives. Hopefully our audience now knows that this is what we would like to do, right? So how do you get your target audience to achieve that objective? How do you reach your objective?
Yeah, so, with the program, we have different activities and we use different tools so that we can make these objectives happen.
So that's so key. I believed when I first got hired that the activity was an extension program. And that's where I was wrong. It's a part of an extension program to help you reach your objective. So we work at the University of Florida, so we'll give University of Florida specific activities. But what are some activities we use to help reach objectives that we develop?
We're doing one right now.
All righty-o. What is this right now?
We're recording podcasts as an activity. So it's something that listeners can listen into for their education. Other activities are maybe different workshops that people go to. We have Bee College, for example.
Exactly.
So that's an activity. Being on social media is an activity. And then, of course, moving to tools, we had to buy all this podcast stuff, right? Sure. We have to have social media. We have to have different platforms. We have to have our website. Yeah. We have to have this facility to be able to hold Bee College.
And online documents and online training videos and a presence on YouTube and a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram account.
The list goes on.
Yeah, so the way that I kind of think about it, right, is we have all of these activities, Master Beekeeper Program, Bee Colleges, in some cases, right, the Honey Judge Program we run, et cetera. And then we have all these tools, these instruments that beekeepers can use outside of those activities, right? So when they're not at our bee college, they've got these online documents and these videos and this podcast, and we answer emails, et cetera. We speak at bee clubs as part of activity. All of this together goes towards trying to get our target audience to achieve the objective that we've identified early on, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so we got all this busy stuff happening. You're out there and you're shaking hands with beekeepers and doing great bee colleges and running a fantastic Master Beekeeper Program. How do you know if and when your objective is actually met?
So that takes some time, and that also just goes on with the evaluation part of that. So evaluation is extremely important. So, if you come to any of our activities, if you go to any extension activities, you'll probably get either a pre-test or a post-test, or, there's some sort of dialogue where there's some sort of focus groups that are together.
Yeah, it's funny, when I was hired at the University of Florida, I remember that one of our associate deans came and gave a new faculty training session. And she said that there were 5 levels of program and evaluation. And I'm guessing everybody has different levels. But what she taught me is the first one was simply number of participants. Mm-hmm. The second was satisfaction surveys, essentially. Third was knowledge gain. Fourth was behavior change. And fifth was some sort of kind of socioeconomic or environmental change. So, for example, going up in that group, how many people are at our activities? How many people came to Bee College? How many people in the Master Beekeeper Program? How many people read our websites or watch our videos or listen to our podcasts? Okay. Number 2, are people satisfied? Do they tell you that they're learning? Do they say that we enjoy receiving information the way that you're giving it to us, et cetera? The third one is knowledge gain. you mentioned before and after test. How do you measure knowledge gain? How do you know that what you're actually teaching is sinking in, right?
Yeah.
All right. The fourth level is behavior change. It does no good for us to preach if people don't do what we say, right?
Yeah.
So if we teach Varroa sampling, we want people to go out and sample for Varroa. If we teach treating a certain ways for Varroa, we want them to do it.
In my opinion, that's the hardest one.
Exactly. Well, to me, there was even one the scarier, at least when I think about it, it's the one on top of that, which is that highest level of evaluation, which is, are the results being met? Mm-hmm. Did we have reduced colony losses? Are we using fewer miticides to control Varroa? Are colonies more productive, right? Is our objective met? As you can imagine, as you move from the bottom, which is simply numbers, how many people are doing this, to the top, which is we're seeing some sort of environmental, socioeconomic, or bee health change. As you move from bottom to top, it gets increasingly harder to measure.
Yep, and it takes longer and longer. So.
Exactly. And so you've evaluated your program and you've met your objective. Do you kill your program? What do you do?
There's always room for improvement. Always room for improvement. So for me, you keep doing the same activities and then you see if people enjoy them. So you look back at those objectives and you say, wow, nobody showed up to my program. Nobody showed up to Bee College. Maybe it's time to reevaluate that and figure out something else that will work for the audience.
I think that's key. The objective didn't change in that scenario, right? But your strategy to help people get
exactly.
there. That's why, it's funny you say that because I only learned in the last couple of weeks this idea about evaluating your programs throughout your program. I thought it was an in-game thing, but it's not.
No, it's not. You have follow-up, either surveys or even people that will email me throughout the year. Bee College is over and people are still emailing, wanting to know when the next Bee College is. That's part of evaluation.
And listeners, I submit to you that is the way extension should be done. It cannot be pointless. It cannot be mindless. It can't be just entertaining where I zoom in and give a talk and everybody's happy about it.
Although it is entertaining.
It needs to be directional. At its fundamental core, those of us who have extension responsibilities need to be working with our clientele group to reach smart objectives, to change the industry for the better, to improve the sustainability of bees and beekeeping. Amy, before we go and leave this extension segment, I hate to even mention this, but what does it take to do extension?
I don't want to say this, but
you got to.
Money, money, money.
It's funny. We talked about this with research on a separate podcast, but it takes money to do extension. It costs money to host a podcast. All this equipment had to be purchased somehow. It costs to do Bee College. So how do you recuperate or recover costs associated with managing an extension program?
Extension used to be free. That was part of the land grant. It was just to provide free education. Have you seen that page that says, 30 minutes of my time wasn't just 30 minutes of my time. It was years and years and years of practice and experience and failure before I get to the point where I can get something done in 30 minutes.
No, that's pretty awesome, though.
Yeah, that's
wish
exactly
I had seen it.
That's exactly what it is. So there are lots of resources. We bring in guest speakers, and to have more quality, we really do have to put a little bit more money into that. And so that's just how extension works. That's just how education works. That's just nothing's free.
Yeah, it's called cost recovery, essentially.
Yep.
It costs money to do extension, but if it's done well, it really changes lives. Last two things, and I feel like I said that with the money, but I feel like this is important, worth noting. Extension can't be done without people. And so we cannot do it alone. We have to partner with beekeepers. We have to partner with colleagues. We have to partner with government and other scientists, et cetera, to make sure that our information is valid and our objectives are met. But secondly, and hopefully finally, we need to talk just briefly about the structure of extension, right? It comes out of a land-grant institution. I am an extension specialist. You were a former county faculty member, and we both have extension responsibilities. What does that mean? Give us a brief overview of how the personnel structure of extension.
Yeah, so, on everyone's kind of ground level, there's going to be your county faculty. So this is we call it county faculty here in Florida, but they're called something different all around the United
often
States.
County agents, right?
Yep, so county agents. And so, under that, then there are regional agents. So we have regions. So, break your state up into regions. There's probably a regional map, and with your land-grant university, there's probably some website that has the breakdown of your state. And then we go kind of statewide. So there are specialists, there are statewide extension personnel, and then it just keeps growing. I mean, it's a partnership that's a federal, state, and county level. So it's really a collaboration between all of the above.
Well said. We're going to dive way more into this topic in the future, but for now, Amy, that was a fantastic overview. Thanks for co-hosting and being interviewed at the same time.
Yay.
For additional resources, visit the podcast page on our website, ufhoneybee.com.
In order to discuss research here at the University of Florida, we have decided to invite our very own Dr. Umberto Boncristiani to join us in the studio this morning to help us think about the research projects that we have here and tell you guys a little bit about what we do. Hello, Umberto. How's it going?
Hi, everyone. Glad to be back.
All right. Fantastic. Now, you've been at the University of Florida for how long now?
Almost 2 years now.
Do you feel like a Gator yet?
I'm a Gator person now. The weather is perfect to me. I came from Brazil. It's very hot and humid, and I'm pretty good here.
Now,
Still pretty hot and
do you
humid.
cheer for the Gators?
I've never been in a game yet.
But you were at NC State and you were close to the University of Maryland, I guess. Did you ever cheer for those guys?
I'm not a...
You're not a sports guy, that's what you're saying.
I'm not football. I'm a soccer.
Umberto
kind
is
of.
finding all these enemies now after
I need to
secret.
protect myself here.
Well, you recognize you're in the SEC, which is the home of the best
I know.
football teams in the nation. Take that, rest of the conferences.
I heard about that every single day.
All right, well, I just want to remind you. All right, well, we don't need to talk about this any longer. There are plenty of podcasts to talk about sports. So let's talk instead about research at the University of Florida Honeybee Research and Extension Lab. Of course, we're a land-grant institution. We have responsibilities in extension, instruction, and research. And so you are heavily involved in the research leg of the land-grant stool here at UF. That's
correct. I take a lot of different research projects related with honeybee husbandry.
No, that's good. I mean, if you think about it, so you've kind of come into our program pretty recently, as it goes. And prior to you coming here, we had kind of three broad research emphases in the lab. The first of those being honeybee husbandry, which we'll talk about more with you. The second of those being honeybee ecology and conservation, and the third of those being integrated crop pollination. So we'll talk about all those in detail. But first, I want to talk about honeybee husbandry. What is husbandry? That's a big old fancy term.
Are you a husband?
Well, that's an art to grow organism in benefit of human beings. To protect them, to make them healthy, and for them to provide things for us. And there is a lot of challenges involved in that, and how to grow them, how to keep them, how to feed them, how to protect them, and many different levels.
Are you talking about husbands or people or bees?
And right now, bees or cows or any, that's what husbandry is.
Yeah, it's kind of a term I hear in agriculture all the time, right? You have husbandry associated with cattle and
cattle,
sheep and chickens, et cetera. It's the art of keeping those things alive in a way that's ethical.
And productive.
Yeah, good point.
And healthy and...
But also in an ethical way, right?
Yes,
That's interesting. So you think about keeping them alive and healthy, but also happy.
Happy.
All right.
Yeah.
So you say you do research on honeybee husbandry. What does that mean specifically for the bee?
Well, beekeepers have lots of different challenges to keep bees alive, especially in the last 15 years now. Things got pretty crazy about how, with the decline of honeybees, there is lots of different changes. Climate change, nutrition difficulties. There is lots of challenges that beekeepers face every single day, and I listen to beekeepers, and we design projects here to solve those problems.
So you're an applied researcher. So
Yes.
your research is primarily applied. Now, is that a lot of the research that's being done in the lab? Is a lot of it's applied?
Well, what I do, everything is applied. I listen to the beekeepers. The beekeepers come to me with problems. We did a survey in all the state of Florida to identify all the research needs honeybee researchers have, beekeepers have, and
They have lots of needs, all of the above.
They do have lots of
Trust
needs.
me,
That's
researchers
true.
also have needs.
And I got a a lot of calls every week about beekeepers complaining about different things and different challenges they have.
So I think this is an important thing to think about, right? So you do honeybee husbandry research. So broadly under that category, anything that deals with beekeeping is that, right? So nutrition, disease and pest control, that includes varroa, small hive beetles, viruses, et cetera. Honeybee stock improvement, the impacts of pesticides on bees, anything that essentially improves bee health or affects bee health, management, research, et cetera. All of this falls under the husbandry category, right?
Correct. All those challenges.
And since it's applied research, I love exactly what you said. The folks listening think probably that we just cook these research ideas up kind of willy-nilly, but in the applied research field, the purpose of applied research is actually to do research that has application for a clientele group. So if you're doing research to help beekeepers, it's got to be stuff that in some way has a trickle-down effect and actually helps beekeepers. So how do we get ideas about what to do? And I love what you said. We have to ask beekeepers. We can't dream these things up ourselves. We actually have to ask. And you and Amy worked together recently on a survey where you asked beekeepers. Amy, you'll talk a little bit about the survey?
Yeah, so we actually put out a survey to commercial beekeepers. So we only sent, we did it in person. So we are at the Florida State Beekeepers Association. We handed out the survey on paper form. And then we went ahead and emailed all the commercial beekeepers, so anyone who was registered with 100 hives or more. We asked them, how they received their education. We asked them what research methods they'd like to see. And we actually asked them to rank, what they felt was the most important research projects that we could do here at the lab. We came up with a lot of really good results as far as, a lot of beekeepers have the same issues, the same challenges that are out, on their apiaries and on the land that they're working on. So it's been really interesting, and we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, just to interject here, I'm at the risk of making this Florida-centric. I'd like to back up a hair and see if we can expand it to the U.S. Fortunately, we live in a state where a lot of beekeepers pass through, right? 20% of the nation's colonies pass through Florida. Every year we have a large number of commercial beekeepers. So we are trying to work with them and asking them for this husbandry research. What is it that you need? And, other states can do the same thing. I encourage listeners around the U.S. and around the world, for that matter, to find their closest bee researcher, find a way to survey your beekeepers to determine research needs, and then work with your local researcher to develop research strategies to address those needs. We're doing that here in Florida, but that doesn't mean it can't be done elsewhere around the U.S. So you've got to work with those scientists. And in the state of Florida, we're fortunate to have you, Umberto. So in some of your interactions with beekeepers, what are some of the things that they are saying are important? I think big level, what are some big issues that beekeepers feel need to be addressed from the applied research perspective?
Beekeepers need a solution for the biggest enemy of honeybees today, which is varroa mite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Varroa destructor is heavily the number one problem in beekeeping in the world today, and beekeepers are asking to new solutions for that.
Sure, I think that's crucial, right? And then varroa, of course, spread pathogens. To me, varroa is kind of like the cancer in the bee world. It's the thing that everybody's studying, and there's lots of research money going into it. But in my opinion, I hate to say this, on a podcast, it seems like there's very little progress made on new control strategies. We all hear about new control strategies, but nothing translates to the field, right?
How many years we are dealing with that, and we don't have a diverse.
Exactly. And if you think about it, varroa is not the only issue bees face. So what are some other things that beekeepers raise as research areas that need to be addressed?
Another point they talk about a lot is about nutrition, how to feed bees, what to give it to them, the timing, and these issues matter. If your bees do not have what they need, they're not going to thrive.
I think that this is so key. You say nutrition. One of the ways of identifying research needs by beekeepers is exactly what you guys have done. You've spoken to beekeepers, you've surveyed beekeepers. The Bee Informed Partnership, which we're going to talk about in a later segment in this episode, it's a group that asks beekeepers what are the biggest issues facing your colonies. And again, we'll talk about that later, but one of those things is nutrition. So, there are lots of ways to get that feedback and develop research strategies around this. We also, of course, Umberto, this is a little bit before your time, but I think we're going to kick it back up here. We also get a lot of chatter about the impacts of pesticides on bees, right? So all research associated with how pesticides impact bees. We've done a lot of that here. We hope to do a lot more of that. But again, it's not really necessarily in your wheelhouse because it doesn't immediately, instantly affect the colony, but it's something that we've discovered that beekeepers really want to know a lot about. So Umberto, through needs assessments, we determined that varroa, right, and nutrition are big issues. We've talked a little bit about the pesticide research that we've done in the lab, but there are other things that beekeepers say are important to them. What are some of those other things that you've looked at or that we're going to look at in the future?
Well, there is beekeepers talk a lot about queen issues they have.
Mm-hmm.
They have lots of, the queens are not surviving the same amount of time they normally survive. So there is a correlation with pesticide use and all different kind of problems with queens.
Yeah, so when you hear other scientists talk about this, they usually use the fancy term stock improvement programs, right? They're wanting to improve the stock that is available to us for our use. So that's certainly one thing. And of course, I know every time I step over in the lab, I see you doing some sort of viral work. We'll talk about that on future podcasts, but viruses are important to beekeepers. They usually go hand in hand with varroa. There's also nosema things that we've looked into. And of course, I don't want to just highlight our lab. One of the points of this podcast is we are going to be bringing in scientists from around the U.S. and around the world, for that matter, to talk about the research that they need. And since this podcast is really targeting beekeepers, we're going to make sure that research they discuss has application to beekeepers. And I think that's key, Umberto, right? Because that's what beekeepers are bending your ear about all the time. I don't care if you do it if it doesn't help me.
Umberto, tell me something that's going to help me.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, to see all the research that's actually happening on a worldwide level. I just gave a talk the other day and someone was asking me, so is varroa just something that is a Florida thing? And I'm like, no, people from around the world are doing research, are working on mites, are working on, just the different stressors that honeybees have. And it's just really amazing that there can be that many researchers focusing on one insect, right, on honeybees.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. One of the things, though, it's great, right? I go to these international meetings, I see all these people talking about these fantastic research projects, but sometimes I leave these meetings wondering, what's in it for the beekeeper. Umberto, you are serving an industry that's desperate for answers, desperate for help. And I think that's why honeybee husbandry research is so important.
Correct. Beekeepers have problems to translate those things they see in those meetings from researchers. And absolutely. I think that's my work here is to do the bridge.
You know what's crazy? That's only one of the research categories we do here at the University of Florida Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory. I'll discuss the other two briefly. The second one, of course, is honeybee ecology and conservation. And ecology is simply the interaction between living species and one another or their environment. So we essentially have done work in the past looking at honeybee interactions with some of their pests and pathogens, not from an applied perspective, but from a more basic perspective. We've also done some work on truly wild honeybee populations. We've done a lot of molecular ecology where we're looking at molecular identifiers of some of the honeybee species and some of the honeybee subspecies. I have a long-term goal here at the lab of developing and feeding a honeybee conservation program where we're looking at the conservation of honeybees where they are native around the globe, because there's still a lot of diversity in these wild populations, and I think that the preservation of these species is important. So this honeybee ecology and conservation branch of our research efforts here looks kind of into that. Our third category, of course, is integrated crop pollination, where we're looking at the contributions of honeybees. We've done some work with other bees as well, looking at their contributions to the pollinated crops that we have here, but also collaborating with scientists around the U.S. So, we've got a lot of varied research projects here. At any given time, we have 30 to 40 research projects. We're publishing usually over 10 refereed manuscripts a year on the type of work that we're doing. But Umberto, to me, research is the fun part, but what does it actually take to do research, right? We have these great ideas. We've gotten great input from our clientele. We've got all of these projects we want to do, but what does it take to do a research project?
Funding.
Oh my gosh. I was hoping you'd say that.
Money.
Everybody believes that every day the University of Florida president, at least here for this purposes of this podcast, but other university presidents just drive up in their trucks right outside the respective bee labs, and they just open the tailgate and sweep money out into our foyer so that we
Is
can
that not what happens?
Amy, that's what happens when you work in extension. You just have this skewed view of what research is. Yeah, that's not what happens. Umberto, how do we get funding?
Well, I'm very fortunate here. have beekeepers that we work together, and they're being very generous and contributing with donations to the lab.
Yep. There's also other ways, right?
Other ways, we write grants.
That sounds
funding
fun.
grants.
Oh, it
for
is the top of my
USDA.
list of fun things to do every day when I come to work.
Yeah, writing grants.
What is a grant?
Is a research. We are just begging. We're just begging to work.
Well, it's funny, it's everybody has this idea that, there's a need, and since there's a need, the government's just going to give you funding for it. But that's not true. We can have the best ideas and want to do the best research projects on planet Earth, but if we don't have funding to do the work, it's dead in the water. It takes funding to do every aspect of a research project, right? From the vehicles that we have to drive to the field. They need gas and transmissions and
Everything.
It takes money to pay salaries of the people who work on the project. It takes money to buy the reagents and do the analyses. Everything, right?
Yeah, every single
What
thing.
requires money, Umberto?
Everything.
Everything. Don't
requires-
overthink it, Umberto.
He's sitting here trying to figure out.
It's like, oh my gosh, what's Jamie asking me to say? No. But in reality, what we're trying to communicate here is that research is what we love to do. We love to hear from our clientele group and shape our research programs to address need, but it takes funding. It also takes partnerships, right? We cannot do this alone, right?
Not alone. We have partnership with people all over the world. We work with people all over the world.
Yeah, that includes collaborators at other institutions. It
Yes.
includes government officials. It includes, in our case, the USDA. It includes companies, industry. It also includes beekeepers. There are a lot of projects specifically you can't do, Umberto, unless you have beekeeper collaborators.
Oh yeah, they're partners. They're partners. They donate the land. They donate the hives. They're
And the labor sometimes,
the
right?
labor sometimes, and they give very powerful inputs that we need those inputs from people that every day in the field looking, observing bees.
Yeah, so I've been working kind of in the research bee world for 20 years, right? And I'm just going to make a statement here that's a little dangerous, but there's a general science aversion, I would argue, among kind of the commercial industry, right? I've just seen a lot of kind of give and take between scientists and beekeepers. And what I want to say is we all have a common goal. We want to improve bee health, and collaborations are critical for that.
Yes.
Beekeepers, all bee scientists need you, right? They need your ideas, they need your support, they need your collaboration. Otherwise, research cannot happen.
That's correct.
Well, Umberto, we look forward to seeing the great things that you do to help the beekeeping industry, not only here in Florida, but also the U.S. and beyond. Welcome aboard. We look forward to having you on more podcasts.
Thank you. I'm available.
Thanks, Umberto.
Have questions or comments? Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at UF Honeybee Lab.
Welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed learning about extension and research. I know it was just riveting conversation.
Riveting indeed. Well said, Amy.
Now to tie it together, we have Dr. Meghan Milbrath, who is the academic specialist at the Michigan State University Department of Entomology. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, I was going to say, struggle with that one.
Yeah, I know.
It's right there in front of you.
I know. She also has a beekeeping business called Sand Hill, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well, and we hope to bring her in a later episode. But we do know that she has a 50-50 research and extension appointment. Is that right, Dr. Milbrath?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Awesome. Well, welcome. We're so happy to have you here. And I guess we just want to talk about, your lab and other labs outside of our lab here.
Hey, Megan, before we even get started, I just want to say something. I think it's really cool. When we were talking to you before this, I was asking you to, tell us how you'd like to be introduced. And I love the fact that you said, and by the way, I run a beekeeping business. I think that's important because everywhere I go, people, beekeepers ask me, well, do you keep bees? Because they're testing you, right? They want to see. Mm-hmm. And if you say no, then your street cred has completely gone. In your case, you actually run a bee business. You don't just have a few colonies, but you're trying to make money on those colonies. So that's cool too. All right, so welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Dr. Milbrath, would you like to talk to us about some of your extension and research? Do you have an instruction appointment?
I technically do not at the moment, but I have in the past. So we just had our previous apiculture specialist retire this year, and so I took over his apiculture and pollination course in the fall. So during that period, I had a 10% teaching appointment. And so there's definitely some restructuring happening in the future, depending on how we do that. And some of the teaching that I do is actually covered under my extension work. And so it does change depending on the demands.
So I think Meghan, your lab is a great example of what Amy and I have been talking about already in this podcast. We've discussed extension, what it is. We discussed research, what it is. And you've got that 50-50 split. So you exemplify someone who has to do half of your time on research and half of your time on extension. So let's think about extension. What is it that you and your lab do at Michigan State University in the realm of extension? What is it to you, and what do you do, and what are you trying to achieve?
Sure. So the main overarching mission is to respond to practical needs in the agricultural community. My role is a little different than some of the straight beekeeping extension and apiculturist positions. So when I started, I've been at Michigan State for 5 years now in my current position. And when I started, I was hired to coordinate their overall pollinator program. So most of my research is, honeybee diseases. That's my background, is in disease transmission, but a lot of the outreach I do is much broader than that. So it would include programs. We developed a course to teach the public about pollinators. I do a lot of work working with pesticide recertification. And so I do a lot of extension to people who are land managers and going for pesticide recertification credits. I do a lot of extension with growers on abilities to take their land and put it into national or more natural habitats, and solar companies and things like that. So I would say the bulk of it is working directly with beekeepers of all sorts, but then there's a lot of it that's broader, that's related to more just pollinator issues.
So I think that's great. You've got varied target audiences, right? You've got growers, you've got beekeepers, et cetera. So how do you fund your extension programs, right? That's one of the discussions in our world is we got all these great ideas to reach beekeepers, et cetera, but that costs money. So how do you generate funding to support your extension program at Michigan State?
Yes.
The $1 million question for all of us, right?
Well, I mean, we've been very fortunate. It is a time that people do really care about bees and recognize the importance. And so I would say that we do focus on programs that we can fund, plus we do have some general funding. So my position itself is funded directly through Michigan State University. I'm funded half through Ag Bio Research and half through MSU Extension. And so that does give me flexibility to kind of operate on things that I find important either way. For our extension, we've received funding from both the Michigan Commercial Beekeepers and the Michigan Beekeepers Association. We received a grant through MSU Extension to develop like our Pollinator Champions course, but now that has become self-funded in that it does bring in money.
Sure.
So that's one of the things that we're trying to do a little more, is find these programs that can at minimum be self-supporting so that they can fund the instructors and fund the space and fund the bees or whatever we need. We did get a really large grant to do called Mite Check, which is a critical agriculture research and extension grant, which was really extension focused to try to train people on mites and so and how to monitor for them. And so a lot of the outreach that we do is extension funded. We also have a large program, Heroes to Hives, and that's been largely donation funded. So it is trying to we even crowdsourced to get our truck paid for. So
that's actually a good idea.
Yeah, it is trying to, because a lot of what we do is really trying to be responsive of what people actually want and need. And so we'll kind of say like, okay, and we do have a lot of partners too. So with the pesticide recertification clinics, those are things that are already ongoing, and they're funded by the either Extension or Michigan Nursery and Landscape, and they can just say, well, we want some more diverse programming and we want to just reach that audience. So we can kind of work within existing structures as well.
Awesome. So in our extension segment, we kind of talked about program evaluation and what that looks like, because a lot of the time with extension, we always tell people about the activities that we do. So, there, it sounds like you're doing a lot of really cool activities. And so my question for you, Dr. Milbrath, is how do you evaluate the success of your programs? What does that look like? And how do you know that you're succeeding? And when do you know when you need to kind of reevaluate some of the activities that you're focusing on?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And Extension does love monitoring and evaluation. And that is something that is hard to get funding for as much time as it requires to do well.
Well said.
And so I think part of it is realizing, if you need to monitor enough to write a report on it, or if you need to monitor enough to warrant seeking more funding, or where we are in this state right now, there has been kind of a gap in extension. And so there's a lot of really low hanging fruit. And so some of our work has been really easy to justify because, people really feel like they're struggling and need more information on it. And we're just facilitating getting them better information. So we do a lot of monitoring and evaluation now. A lot of it is just how many meetings do we put on, whether it's in person or with Zoom, how many people are coming in. And the nice thing about some of the technologies that are happening now is it's really easy to get real-time evaluations. So previously, when we were trying to get people to submit surveys about what did you learn, you have really low return on those, or you feel like you're harassing people and they have survey fatigue. We've been really happy with things that are just kind of quick and in the actual time that people are doing it. So getting feedback to say, was this useful? Did you learn from that? The hard part with that, though, is that you do get the input of the people who are there. So you don't get the input of the people who, the people who like the meetings are the ones who go to the meetings. And so one of the things we struggle with is trying to reach more people in different places.
So Megan, one of the things that I appreciate that you've already said, may not have heard yourself, is to me, a lot of people think extension is speaking at meetings or answering emails, but we talked about in our previous segment, it's purpose driven. And when I heard you describe your extension programs, they sounded very purpose driven. So I already knew that you had a goal of getting a target audience somewhere and evaluating the success of the program.
Yeah, and I think people are also just recognizing the need for outreach and education, and that looks different, depending on your demographics.
So we're going to segue here shortly into your research program, but before I do, I want to ask you one last question related to your extension program. It's going to be incredibly difficult, Megan, so just bear with me. Essentially, I want to ask you, what do you see as the three biggest extension needs for beekeepers across the U.S.?
That's a really good question, and it's
of course.
Yeah, it really is, and I think one thing. Okay, I'm going to give you the three big ones that maybe come to mind, and they maybe I won't stand behind them a year from now as the top three needs. I think one is more decision-making tools. So with a lot of other crops, we have a lot of resources for IPM and models that allow people to make decisions more confidently. And so if you're a beekeeper and you're out there trying to decide, do I treat right now or do I try to get goldenrod honey? And you're trying to sift through all of your mental data, it would be really nice if you had, an app on your phone that has model data that says, honey prices are this is what you generally get in your area, and that can help you make decisions. I think some of the really practical decision tools, like we have for other cropping systems, would be incredibly useful.
Well, that's a great answer. So can you give me two more that's as good as that? That was great. That was great. Pressure's on, Megan.
This is the problem, though, is the needs are so good. It's easy for me to come up with some of the needs. I think another thing is having a more a warehouse of all of these practical data. So with extension, you really focus on applied research that has direct implications. Sometimes it's hard for people to actually find the output of all of those research programs. So, for example, I can know that we've done all this work on oxalic acid and that, other people have done work on oxalic acid. But if someone wants to look up like, hey, how well is oxalic acid working? There's not like a clearinghouse with, here's the status update of what we know so that people can make really good recommendations. It's hard to make good recommendations, especially in a system that's so diverse and complex.
Sure.
And so having kind of these places where you can easily access, here is absolutely the standard of what the up-to-date knowledge is, would be really useful.
Yeah.
And then I think a third thing for extension is trying to have faster ways that we can look through different treatments and have more access available to, so for example, for getting new mite treatments to the market quicker, to have a pathway that is efficient testing. I think we really do need to acknowledge that I think we're really soft about the crisis that these parasites have. Even though we talk about Varroa all the time, we would never have a deadly parasite that would kill off huge proportions of another livestock for decades and it not be a national emergency. And so I think
absolutely.
to understand that is, 90% of the industry is dependent on one chemical that is now showing signs of resistance. And it should be everybody, all hands on deck of trying to figure out, what are we going to do 5 years from now? And where is that going to be? And how can we make sure that people are set up to have functioning operations at that point?
Yeah, that's great. I think listening to you talk about your extension program makes me feel that there's hope for the future. Well, let's segue a little bit into research. This is the other half of what you're supposed to do apparently in your 50-50 split. So tell us a brief overview of your research program. How do you categorize your research? What types of things do you do?
So, my research has been pretty variable up until this point, and part of it has been where we can get funding. So we have done some landscape things. The research that I'm doing now, though, is really in line with my background. So one of the things that makes my program a little different is that I've never taken an entomology class. My entire background is in public health and disease transmission and epidemiology. And so
you didn't miss anything. Sorry, that's a bad. I said you didn't miss anything. That's a bad entomology joke. I'm sorry.
No, I have tried to make up with it though. I have started collecting, so I'm doing that like intro entomology course where I develop my collection now. In my own time, so I can catch up. But so my first love is really diseases and disease transmission and looking at environmental risks. And so right now I've been doing a lot of work on European foul brood and the bacterial diseases. So even though I talked about, Varroa being this national emergency, European foul brood and the bacterial diseases are also just a huge problem nationwide. And so looking at the risk factors for what causes those diseases and what allows them to clear up faster, or what inputs beekeepers can take. And the nice thing about working kind of within a disease system is it does still allow for some basic research, so understanding the diseases themselves and virulence factors and things like that. But it's always through this lens of being highly applicable and dealing with what beekeepers are actually working with and what tools they functionally have available to them.
So, I think one of the things that people think about when they think about research and extension is they kind of disconnect them. Research is what scientists do, right? Extension is what specialists or teachers do. And in reality, a successful applied research program integrates naturally with extension because you're doing work that helps a clientele group, and then you have to communicate it to them and change their behavior, right? And so just could you discuss a little bit in your own view about the interface or the integration of your two programs? How do you strategize? I mean, how do you try to make them work together to the benefit of your clients?
Sure. And so some of the programs, there's a really, really natural way that they fit together, and that we can do. So, for example, with the blueberries and European fall brood coming out of that, first off, we worked directly with commercial beekeepers. So they were heavily involved. They knew about the experimental design and were in a lot of communication with them. So we were able to tell them quickly what things we see working or not working, even before we get to the point that it's published. And so that's something where we're actually hands-on working with them with an actual problem that is with them. But then we're also taking those same samples and sending them off to labs to do complete sequencing and microbiome studies and that kind of stuff. So we're using those same samples that we take to develop the number of colonies that are sick and to understand European foul brood, and we're doing basic research on them and getting, those data that we won't have back for maybe 2 years. And so the analogy that I use is it's kind of different battles, same war. And so it's really similar to my work in public health, is like when you have a actual issue with a health issue on the ground, you have to have, the NGOs that are coming in and actually, handing out the bed nets, but you also have to have the people who are understanding the life cycle of the mosquitoes. And when you do problem-based work, it does require the basic research, the applied research, the education to the public, and then also just groups to, help the people who are suffering from the problem and get things done. And so it does require kind of all of those aspects. I think the extension role is really key, though, because if you have a foot in the research and the outreach and extension side, you get to understand, you talk to people, your stakeholders, figure out the problems, but then you can also speak science and you can dig through the literature and figure out, 80 years ago, we were also dealing with this, or 20 years ago, we had this solution that maybe we can revisit it in this particular way. So it allows you to kind of have an understanding and access of both worlds.
So Meghan, we can't end this segment with you without fulfilling the little bit of a tease that we did earlier on with the beekeepers. Could you give us a 30-second overview of your beekeeping business? I think that's pretty cool. So tell us a little bit about Sandhill Apiaries.
Sure. So I've been beekeeping since the early 90s. I started as a hobby, and then in about 2011, I started to sell queens and nukes. And so for a while, selling nukes was basically the bread and butter for that. Since I've started to do the research in blueberries, the thing about blueberry bloom is they bloom right at the same time as when you need to go out and make nukes. So I've really switched to honey production, and I still do the queen rearing. And so I try to run about 100 hives now. When I was doing it, when I did my postdoc, I was doing 75% time. And then between my postdoc and my current position, I was just running bees full time. So at that time, I was doing about 300 hives, mainly for nuke sales. Now I'm down to about 100. In my free time, between my full-time job that I run for mainly honey production, and then just really focusing on making good queens accessible to people.
Yeah, that's great. So Meghan, thank you so much. We will be having you back here in a couple of weeks, and so we can focus a little bit more, in depth on your research. And so we're really excited to have you back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, you are a great integration of research, extension, and practical beekeeping knowledge, because you yourself are a beekeeper.
Thank you.
So everyone, I just want to thank, publicly Dr. Meghan Milbrath, academic specialist at Michigan State University, Department of Entomology, who also runs a beekeeping business. So thank you for joining us on Two Bees in a Podcast.
Thanks, Meghan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back, and now it's that time for question and answer, aka what we call it here at the lab, Stump the Chump.
Wait a minute, who's the chump in this scenario?
I'm gonna let you guess on that one.
Well, duly noted.
So here we are. We have asked questions. Moving forward in the next couple of podcasts, we are going to start promoting it on our social media, seeing if people have questions for our guest speakers. That way they can start answering some of those questions and answers as well. What do you think, Jamie?
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Awesome. So I just have a couple of questions here that we had from one of our Reddit pages, and a lot of these questions I think a lot of people have. So hopefully they'll find it helpful. So one person asked, how you got into entomology. So how did you even get into entomology as a career? Who loves bugs that much?
Well, the truth is not me. All right, so very briefly, I've been keeping bees since I was 12. And I did science fair projects and 4-H projects with bees. And both of those allowed me to meet Dr. Keith Delaplane at the University of Georgia. He helped me in my high school years through, advice on those types of projects. Mm-hmm. So when I went to the University of Georgia, he invited me to work in his bee lab. And I already liked bees, and of course he was one of my role models, so it was kind of a no-brainer for me. So I worked with Keith Delaplane for 4 years at the University of Georgia and discovered that I love science. I loved bees already, but I loved science, and so I put the two together. Now, it's important to know I did not like entomology. I was a biology major at the University of Georgia. In fact, I often said at the time, I wish I could study bees without being an entomologist. But nevertheless, I didn't. I went overseas to do a PhD in South Africa at Rhodes University and have a PhD in entomology. The funny thing about the South African system is it's modeled after Oxford, where they do not require graduate students to take courses. So, in fact, they usually don't even allow it or promote it.
That sounds so nice.
Well, what's funny is that means I could have gotten a PhD in entomology without ever having taken an entomology course. So I went back at Rhodes and took all the entomology courses that they offered to undergraduates, which amazed people at the time. They had no idea that a person could be in grad school and take courses and do research. Of course, all people in the United States do that. It's just the way we do it. But anyway, I did that, became an entomologist. I won't say that I love entomological sciences, but I will say insects now do fascinate me. And bees, of course, just rock my world. So that's a brief overview of how I became an entomologist.
So what was your major before?
It was biology as an undergrad. I was pre-med biology.
Oh, okay, pre-med.
Yeah, in fact, I'll tell you why I was pre-med. When I grew up in a rural area and I loved science, but I thought medicine was the pinnacle of science. So I just assumed everybody who liked science had to go off and be a medical doctor, but that clearly
What kind of doctor did you want to be?
Well, I started wanting to be a vet, and then I wanted to be just a human doctor, but discovered I didn't like humans. And so I decided I was going to work with bees. And so, of course, when bees get mad at you, the worst they can do is sting you. When humans get mad at you, they can do lots worse.
Sure. Now, on that note, talking about stinging, that kind of leads me to the next question that we have. It's about smokers. So
people who smoke?
Well, I mean, yes, maybe.
Because I have no experience with that.
So people are wondering, what are the best ingredients to put into a smoker to calm them down?
Calm who down? The bees or the people?
The bees.
All right. I just want to I need some clarity here. All right. So I use pine straw. That's because that's a lot of what's available here. I've also used cut grass. I'm talking about the growing grass variety. That's not a code for marijuana, right? Which people, you laugh.
I didn't even think about that.
People have asked me, can you put marijuana in a smoker? I'm like, well, you can put anything in a smoker, but that doesn't mean it's good for you. So I've always advocated cut grass and marijuana. See, I've done it right there. Incidentally, I've never done drugs, so I feel like I need to say this at that point.
Oh man, I almost feel like we need to just take
this
out.
No, let's just let it go.
Podcast.
Let's let it go. All right, so I've always advocated, dried cut grass or pine straw. I know a lot of people use wood pellets. We've used those here at the University of Florida. I think those are perfectly acceptable. And incidentally, when I lived overseas in South Africa, it was routine for people to use dried animal dung. If you think about it, horses and cows eat grass, and that's again.
I bet that smelled really good.
Yeah, well, it's not so bad once it's dry. One thing I will caution people against is people have used burlap and other rags, et cetera, which is fine, but you need to make sure that they were not soaked first in something such as oil or something like that. You don't want to burn anything that might have a chemical in it. So all of those are really good things that you can use in a smoker. So
when you're using the smoker, does continuous use of the smoker on the bees, does that weaken the hive in the long run? Is there anything? There's no evidence. I'm not aware of any research that's shown that using a smoker chronically impacts bees, that there's any negative health effects. And really what smoke does is it masks the alarm pheromone. When bees are getting mad, alarm pheromone's getting produced, and that causes other bees to get mad. So you're just covering that. When we leave and the smoke dissipates, that's that. Now, of course, there's a wives' tale
that smoke causes bees to gorge on honey because they think it's a forest fire and then they're too fat to fly. But I would ask, what evolutionary scenario would produce bees who wanted to get away from a forest fire by eating a lot of food and becoming too fat to fly?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's completely counterintuitive. So it masks alarm pheromones, and there's really no long-term impact. What's really interesting to me, and I don't know the answer to, Amy, is there a long-term impact to the beekeeper from chronic exposure to smoke? I'm not aware of any studies where scientists have looked at that. Now, I don't know if there's any higher incidence of lung cancer in beekeepers than the general public, but I just think it's one of those interesting things that comes up that I've never seen anyone address systematically. That's
very interesting. Well, thanks. That was quite an awkward conversation, but I don't think we'll cut any of that out, so we'll just go ahead and keep it in the podcast.
The truth is the truth, Amy. The truth is the truth.
We'd like to give an extra special thank you to the following: to our editors, Shelby Howell and Bailey Carroll, and to our audio engineer, James Weaver. Without their hard work, Two Bees in a Podcast would not be possible. So thank you.
For more information and additional resources for today's episode, don't forget to visit the UF-IFAS Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory's website, ufhoneybee.com. Do you have questions you want answered on air? If so, email them to honeybee@ifas.ufl.edu or message us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at UF Honeybee Lab. While there, don't forget to follow us. Thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast.